Once again, thank you so much for joining us tonight. We are very pleased to present a program as part of our Maritime Month series, and we have been collaborating all month long with the Penobscot Marine Museum, as we like to do during the month of April, because they put up a gorgeous exhibit. And so if you haven't had a chance to see it, there are a few more days left to visit the Camden Public Library's Picker Room to see the exhibit of vintage photography called Upriver. And if you don't get a chance to see it here, our next speaker is going to tell you a little bit more about where you'll be able to see it next. So tonight from the Penobscot Marine Museum, we have Kevin Johnson. He is the photo archivist. He's going to tell you about the exhibit and our presenter tonight. Kevin, take it away.
Thank you very much, Julia. Thank you very much for all of you to tune in tonight. You're in for a real treat and a fascinating talk. Just briefly, I wanted to tell people that the Penobscot Marine Museum is excited to be open for the season fully this year, beginning Memorial Day weekend, officially May 27th. And if you don't get a chance to see the Upriver Bill Abbott exhibit at Camden, you will have the chance to see it at any time this summer. It is one of our new exhibits that we'll be featuring. It won't be just quite as shiny and new as it is right now. We'll also have a new Costi Rahoma exhibit focusing on his Maine assignments. And Carl Little is presenting a display of 40 different artists' work picturing Penobscot Bay. And we also have one of our permanent exhibits redone and rejuvenated, and it's called At Home at Sea, and it's in one of our captain's houses. So about the Bill Abbott exhibit, Bill Abbott was a captain in the Penobscot pilots. He was born in 1922 on Verona Island, and he learned the piloting world from his father, Captain Merle Abbott, who during that time acted as a pilot, but it was more informal then and a little bit more cutthroat. Boats would need to race out to meet waiting schooners out in the bay. And Bill learned a little bit of this trade from his father, and he ended up going to Maine Maritime and graduating in 1945. And then after a short stint outside of Maine, he returned and teamed up with his father, and eventually he started the Penn Bay Pilots and was a pilot for 50 years, navigating the waters of Penobscot Bay and the Penobscot River. Tonight, you're going to hear from a Penn Bay pilot, Captain David Gelinas, who mentored under Captain Bill. Dave went to Maine Maritime as well, and he has been a Penn Bay pilot since 1992. So he's catching up to Bill now in a number of years as a pilot. He has many great stories to tell about Bill and to help fill people in on how it works being a pilot and what that means. So thank you very much for tuning in. Thank you, Captain Dave, and thank you, Julia.
Well, thank you very much. Bear with me here for a second while I try and get my screen to work.
And I'll let you know if it looks okay, all right?
Okay, how's that look, Julia?
Looks perfect.
All right, very good. Well, thanks for zooming in tonight, everyone. And thank you very much for the opportunity to share some fond memories of Captain Bill. I was very fortunate to have trained under Bill for a number of years and had him as a supporter of my early maritime career. Okay. Cannot seem to advance that, Julia. So this is a tug and barge, the Newark Sun, pushing a loaded oil barge upriver to Bucksport, Maine. All foreign vessels, as well as U.S. vessels registered in the foreign trade with a draft in excess of 9 feet, are required to be under the direction of a Maine state pilot while in Maine waters. State pilots are not advisors to the captain of the vessel. We direct the vessel's operation in state waters. That's our task. Unlike the crew of a vessel, state pilots do not work for or answer to the ship owner or operator. Rather, we operate with the interests of the state in mind. This particular tug came from a U.S. port with a load of oil for Bucksport, and so therefore they would be using a federal pilot, a pilot who was licensed by the Coast Guard for the federal first-class waters of Penobscot Bay and Penobscot River. If this vessel were to sail from Bucksport with orders to go now to St. John, New Brunswick to backload oil, it would then be required to use a state pilot, because then it would be registered in a foreign trip. So we operate under a 2-pilot, 2-license system. As a prerequisite for a state pilot license, you're required to have the federal pilot license first. Currently, there are 4 full-time pilots serving Penobscot Bay and Bar Harbor, with 2 apprentice pilots in the training program. This photo was taken in the about 1966. We're looking at Captain, left to right, Captain Sandy Dunbar, Captain Abbott, Captain Sam Gamache, and Captain Dick Moody. These, along with unpictured Captain Gilbert Hall of Camden, would have been the first state licensed pilot for Penobscot Bay and River. Of these gentlemen in this photo, Captain Gamache is the most senior and most experienced individual. Sam had a very a long and illustrious career with the Coast Guard as the captain of the Snohomish, breaking ice on the Penobscot River for many years. So he trained all the other pilots that are seen in this picture. This is a photo of Captain Abbott with his head in the radar. Captain of the tugboat is looking out the window and steering. And Captain Gil Hall is the gentleman all the way over to the right who's peering out the window trying to see something. Gil was Bill's original partner in the pilots. I think that in this particular instance, Gil is probably the pilot who has the con, and Bill is, he was asked to come along and serve as a second set of eyes, so to speak, to bring that loaded barge up the river in some restricted visibility. It's an extremely stressful situation, and it's a very difficult job to be bringing things up in restricted visibility. Keep in mind that nowadays we have moving map displays, ECDIS or ECDS chart display systems, predicted path indicators, rate of turn indicators, and AIS to assist with traffic management and navigation. And these gentlemen and their predecessors performed thousands of transits of the Penobscot River without the benefit of such tools. This is the tug Gibraltar Straits, bringing the barge St. John Courier into the B&A dock, obviously during the winter months, with a load of pulpwood. Believe it or not, we were importing pulpwood, and we have done that in the past, to go up to the Great Northern Mill in Millinocket. This barge ended up coming all the way around from the West Coast, and Bill Abbott got on board at Monhegan and brought them up Penobscot Bay and docked them at the B&A dock, which we used to call the railroad dock. The railroad went right down to the B&A dock, Bangor and Aroostook Railroad. Originally, I wasn't going to include this picture because it's not the most flattering picture of Bill, but in retrospect, I wanted to include it because it accurately shows the fatigue that's involved in doing the job. This is the job at the end of the job that you just saw, the Gibraltar Straits. Very likely, Bill had been out on Monhegan for the better part of a day, just waiting for the tug to show up. And then he was put aboard by a local lobster boat. He probably came up the bay at not much more than 7 or 8 knots, and then docked the tug and barge with an assist tug at the B&A dock. It's a long trip, very slow job, and the odd hours and long hours take their toll on you. And it really shows in this photo. It actually, Bill, as much as it was hard work, Bill was never shy of working very hard. And in fact, it was a few years after this photo that he suffered a heart attack from working so much, bringing ships up to the port of Winterport. There was a potato blight in Europe, and they lost most of their crop of potatoes sometime back in the 70s. And the port of Winterport got its start by exporting Aroostook County potatoes to European ports. And Bill and Gil were so busy that the ships were stacked up down in Searsport waiting to get up the river to Winterport. That really took a toll on Bill. The Penobscot Bay and River pilots, until very recently, never had the resources to have their own dedicated pilot vessels. So long ago, they established relationships with the fishing communities on both Monhegan and Matinicus Islands. This is the pilot boat Phalarope on Monhegan Island, owned by Captain Stanley. It was built specifically for pilot boat work, as well as some fishing and passenger carrying, by Captain Stanley. He had it built at Penobscot Boat Works in Rockport. It was a built down boat of double plank mahogany, and it was probably the best riding lobster boat that I've ever been on. On Monhegan, the pilot duty was shared between Alfred Stanley and his brother Sherm Stanley, who owned the Phalarope. And then after Sherm retired, his son Shermy took over the pilot work. This is the Matinicus Island pilot boat, Dorothy Diane. The work out on Matinicus was handled equally for decades, for many, many long years, by the Bunker brothers, Albert and Vance Bunker, Dorothy Diane being named after Albert's wife. This boat was a Harris 36, and it was kind of unique in that it was a hard chine boat. Albert really liked his speed, and that was the attribute that the hard chine lobster boat had. It was pretty fast. It was also very wet. Albert really liked his speed, and he was an ex-Navy guy. And I remember bringing a frigate out one day. It had visited Rockland for the Lobster Festival, and I was bringing it outbound to Matinicus. And I told the captain of the frigate that the pilot boat operator was an ex-Navy guy who really liked to show off how fast his boat was. And that when he picked me off the boat, off the frigate, he was going to try and pass the head of the frigate. And the frigate captain looked at me and he said, well, we'll see about that. So as soon as I got on the Dorothy Diane, Albert put the berries to her and got her going as fast as he could. But at the same time, you could see that puff of smoke come up from the frigate's funnels, and off she went, and she just passed us like we were standing still. So at the end of the day, gas turbines beat Detroit diesels any day of the week. Here's the Phalarope alongside a tanker off Matinicus, excuse me, Monhegan, putting Captain Bill aboard. This is obviously the most dangerous part of the job. This is a fairly benign day, but you can imagine if there was a 3, 4, 5 foot sea running with all the bouncing associated, it's pretty challenging getting on and off the ladder. And I'm finding that the ladders are getting taller with each year that passes by. On that particular type of job is one that Bill got quite hurt on once. Here he is at the top of the ship getting aboard, but the Phalarope was alongside a tanker putting Bill on. He had actually gotten on the ladder and was halfway up. And a lot of times the ships will have a tagline coming down from the deck to the bottom of the pilot ladder to help pull the ladder back aboard. Well, somehow that got caught on a cleat on Captain Stanley's boat, and as Bill was climbing up the ladder and the Phalarope was pulling away, that tagline, which was caught on the cleat, pulled the bottom of the ladder away from the side of the ship. And of course, Bill was only halfway up the ladder, so he went out with it. When Captain Stanley saw the line there, instinctively, he just reached for his knife and he cut the line. Well, unfortunately, what happened is that allowed Bill to act like a pendulum and swing into the side of the tanker. He suffered some pretty severe injuries, some internal bleeding and broken ribs, but he continued to climb up the ladder, climbed up to the bridge of the ship, piloted the ship for about 5 hours, docked the ship, took another hour up in Searsport, and only then took himself to the hospital where the extent of his injuries was learned. But Bill, despite his cheery, outgoing demeanor and slight frame, he was a real Iron Man. This is a tanker that's going out past Monhegan Island. There's Manana in the background, and then out past that is a ship. I believe that's the Phalarope just past Manana on its way out to the ship, pick up a pilot. The building in the foreground with the red pickup truck at the base of the building, that's the Stanley Fish House, and that was sort of like the base station for the pilots on Monhegan Island. That's where the VHF radio was, and the dinghy, we used to row a dinghy from the beach right in front of that fish house out to the mooring and then get on the pilot boat and go out there. So there was a lot of time spent in this fish house, either waiting for ships or waiting for the ferry to come or waiting to get a call from a ship. A lot of hours there, a lot of cribbage games there. And I've heard a story once about Bill being the character that he was once on an outbound day when there were two ships coming out at the same time. Captain Stanley went out, got both pilots, Bill Abbott and Sam Gamache, off of their respective ships. And in the process of lingering around the fish house for a few hours afterwards, Bill snuck a bottle of scotch that had been given to Sam from his ship, and he put a brick, there were always bricks laying around fish houses because of the lobster traps, slipped a brick into Sam's pilot bag and took his bottle of scotch. Well, obviously Sam figured it out when he got home, but the guys on Monhegan got a great kick out of that story for a long time. This is vintage Bill. This kind of captures the essence of who he could be. You know, we had to spend a lot of time out on the islands. We're very fortunate now. We don't spend any more time on the islands. We have cell phones, we have email, we have instant communication, but communication has always been the real bailiwick of the piloting industry. You know, when Bill started, they used to get telegrams from the Chatham Marconi Marine wireless station saying, yeah, such and such a ship is due at such and such a day. And Bill or Gil would, you know, go out on the mailboat and then stay on the islands in anticipation of the ship arriving. But quite often, because the ETAs wouldn't get updated, they could be waiting for a day, 2 days, sometimes as many as 3 days, waiting for a ship to come. So the advent of VHF radio was really a godsend to the guys on the island. And then beyond that, when they got small enough, like this particular picture shows, where they had the handheld radios, Bill just thought that was the greatest thing that you could have. He could walk around, he could visit his friends, he could keep in touch with the ships if they were coming. And, you know, before they had the VHF radios and they'd stay on the island waiting for the ships, they'd have to walk down to an outhouse that was down on the south end of the island and literally wait for hours at a time, just peering out of the outhouse, looking to see if there was the ship is coming up to the 14M pilot station. And the rumor was that Bill kept a catalog of old Fredericks of Hollywood catalog out there at the outhouse to entertain himself for hours while he was waiting for ships. One guy on Monhegan used to refer to Bill as Windy Bill because every time Bill Abbott showed up for a job, you could be guaranteed that the weather was going to turn foul and he'd spend a couple of days on the island. I really enjoy this photo. This is, if you look at this closely, the odd thing you'll notice about this particular picture is that the wake of the vessel is in front of the ship. And the reason for that is that Bill is undocking the ship from the B&A dock, the freight dock in Searsport, without the use of tugboats. And he's doing what we call the Abbott Shuffle here, where he'd take a ship off the dock without a tug, and he'd use the propeller effect of the ship. The right-hand turning wheel tends to back to port, bow to starboard. And he would use that to take a ship off and back and fill right in the turning basin, or if the situation called for it, he would just back all the way out of the channel like that until he was out in the harbor and then turn out there. Bill had a lot of sayings about ship handling and navigating in the river, but one of the early things that he taught me was don't fight the ship. And what Bill meant by that was use all the forces to your advantage to the best you can. Don't fight what the ship wants to do. Go with it. Work with it. Work with the ship's forces. Work with the wind. Work with the tide. Work with what you've got. And here he's doing just that. One of my fonder memories of Bill is one day when I was a new pilot, I got cleared to undock a small freighter on my own without the use of tugboats, and Bill was going to do the undocking with me. And I had a very good plan laid out about how I was going to hold this line and back on this line and let this line go and do this and do that. And I had a very elaborate plan, and I thought he'd be so impressed with the thought that I put into it. And he just turned to me and smiled and said, "I don't know about all that, Dave. Why don't you just let the lines go and see what the ship wants to do?" Bill Abbott's dad was a tugboat member, a tugboat crewman and a harbor pilot, a river pilot before Bill. And this particular picture shows him on his tug, the Bismarck, which was a very iconic Penobscot River tugboat, served a lot of vessels up in Bangor. And he is the 7th person from the left in this image. So the next 5 images show a bunch of coastal tankers. And these would have been like the bread and butter jobs that Bill came home for in the 50s. You know, when Bill went out to sea after Maine Maritime Academy, he was on his way working his licenses up on an unlimited basis. But the way Bill always explained it to me, he said, Father called me and said, I have to come home. And it was like no question about, well, I don't want to, Dad. It was sort of like Father called and I came. So Bill always knew he was going to be a river pilot. And when he got the calling, he was put right to work right away. These would have been, you know, like early 50s tankers. Some of them probably date a little bit before that. But this was the heyday of Bangor. At this time, there were 11 working docks in the Penobscot River, most of them in Bangor and Brewer, and most of those receiving petroleum products. Bill told me at one time, I don't know which year it was, but he said in 1 year alone, he logged over 230 trips on the river. So it was tremendously busy. I don't think today people appreciate how busy the ports of Brewer and Bangor were, but they were major seaports. And little vessels like this would have carried, you know, anything from 8 to 20,000 barrels of oil, which has been about 1,200 tons to 3,100 tons deadweight, which is a drop in the bucket compared to today's ships. But these were fully crewed ships, including a galley crew with a cook, and Bill took good advantage of that. Here's another little coastal tanker, Seaboard, kind of an older one, but something that Bill would have been on, certainly Bill's dad. And then the Irene Allen, again, similar size tanker. So most of these tankers were US flagships, usually coming from Boston or New York. They were operated by iconic companies like Spenton-Bush Red Star, which was referred to as the Bushy boats, Spenton-Bush, Boston Fuel, Poling, and Eckloff, to name just a few. The tankers came so often that their crews were very comfortable with navigating Penobscot Bay without a pilot, but they would always engage the services of Bill or his father for the trips to Bangor or Brewer. There were very few aids to navigation in the river, especially in the winter when the ice would move the buoys off station. When I was training in the river, I remarked to Bill about the noticeable lack of aids, especially ranges, which you would expect to see in a constricted waterway. And Bill said to me, oh, we don't want too many aids. If we had those, they might not call the pilots. This particular tanker is the Ethel Tibbetts, which was operated and owned by Boston Fuel, which that particular company, Boston Fuel, had a real dominance on the river for many decades. They brought a tremendous volume of petroleum up to Bangor and Brewer from Boston. In fact, the family that owned the company, the Tibbetts family, had a place down on the Muscle Ridge, and quite often the tankers and tugs and barges later on would go by the Tibbetts house on the Muscle Ridge. So as the tankers only needed a pilot in the river, they would take Bill or his father below Odom Ledge, the first real big hazard in the Penobscot River, just above Fort Point. And Bill, coming from Verona, you know, his family had a place there, and Bill or his father would row out to these arriving tankers from the shorefront. They'd throw up some lines, climb up the pilot ladder, and then the deckhands on the tanker would bring their dinghies aboard. This particular dinghy on these following photos doesn't have a name on it, but Bill told me it was called the Queen Mary. So after boarding the tankers, Bill would stay aboard. They'd bring his dinghy aboard. He'd take it all the way up to Bangor or Brewer. He would stay aboard through the discharge. They'd give him a spare cabin to stay in. and he would take all his meals with the crew. After the discharge, he would then pilot them back down the river, and then they would depart in the vicinity of Odom Ledge. On one occasion, Bill told me during a winter gale outbound, he departed a tanker one night and he started rowing towards Verona, or what he thought was the direction towards Verona. Due to the lack of visibility, the strong winds, and the outgoing tide, Bill ended up coming ashore in North Castine, about 3 miles below his intended destination. This picture and the next one I find fascinating. This is Brewer, Maine. This dock is just downriver from what is now the Chinbro manufacturing facility in Brewer, formerly the Eastern Fine Paper manufacturing facility. And it to me, it boggles my mind that Bill and Gil could bring ships of this size all the way up the Penobscot River and dock in Brewer. It's staggering to think about bringing something. I can imagine if you were up in Brewer and you saw something like this coming up the river nowadays. Same dock here. This is the Shell tanker Esprella. She's 557 feet long. And in this location of the river where that dock is located, it's only 610 feet wide. When I asked Bill how the heck they turn these ships around with limited or no tug availability, he informed me that on the Bangor shore, there was an old sawmill, Stearns's Mill. And for many, many years, they would dump what's called the edgings, the side cuts, not the sawdust, but the side cuts from boards, milled lumber, right into the river. So much so that it formed a bed on the river bottom. And to this day, it's still there. It's referred to as the edgings bed. Well, they let the lines go on this ship and sneak the bow over to that Bangor side of the river. And then they'd give the rudder hard left and a shot of slow or half ahead, work the stern upriver, back her again, and turn the ship around the river by using the bow of the ship in the edgings bed to pivot. This is a more modern ship going up the river. This is a pretty big tanker, about 55,000 ton tanker going into the port of Bucksport. The main port towboats, it was owned at that point. That's the towboats that are owned by John Worth and Duke Tomlin at the time. And this is a pretty good size ship, 55,000 tons. It'd be about 600 feet long and 105 feet wide. So it's just interesting to see that as a sense of scale from what Bill used to, bring up the river in the early days. A very neat trick that Bill taught me with these big tankers was to flip them and go port side too. We try to dock at slack water and the dock in Bucksport, but if you miss the low water, you have another opportunity to go alongside the dock 2 hours after low tide if you can put the ship port side too. Now that's kind of a tricky maneuver because you got to turn her around right there in some current. And Bill taught me how to do that using what's called a quarter line on the tugboats. But it's very dangerous because that quarter line, if you load it up too much, you can trip the tugboat and you can sink and flood the tugboat that way. So it's a very tense maneuver, but Bill was a real ace at it. He did it very, very smoothly, and the tugs had great confidence in him whenever he did that maneuver. Here's a smaller tanker in the old days going under what was in place at the time, the Waldo Hancock County Bridge. It's interesting, in about 25, 27 years ago or so, pretty much right at this spot, I was bringing a tanker in my early days of piloting, and Bill was making the trip upriver with me. And beautiful summer day, a lot of boats out, calm conditions, just lovely, lovely day, very warm. I remember it, very warm. And all of a sudden, on our port side, overtaking us, there's about a 25-foot pleasure boat, open pleasure boat. And there's two people leaning up on the windscreen of the pleasure boat, a guy and a gal just hanging out there, completely buck naked. And we're all staring at that. We're like aghast. It's like, what the heck? Look at that. And Bill says to me, oh, geez, Dave, look at that. Now there's something you don't see every day. And then he turns to me and he says, hey, where's those binoculars? This is an aerial view of the port of Eastport, which Bill was one of the first licensed pilots to open. He and Gil went up there along with local pilot Bob Peacock, and they basically got the first licenses to get the port of Eastport up and running for that mill up in Woodland. This would have been back in the early 80s, I think 79, 80, 81, somewhere in that vicinity. And these are the original Eastport pilots. If I'm not mistaken, I believe the gentleman in the glasses is Howie Wentworth. He may have made those trips, but I might be mistaken about that particular individual. But then there's on the front row, there's Gil Hall. Next to Bill in the green jacket is Captain Dave Sulin, a captain from Rockland, the Rockland area, who was making some trips with the pilots at the time. On the right is, with the pipe, is Captain Gil Hall of Camden. And then behind Dave Sulin is Captain Bob Peacock, who still to this day, after 4 decades, I believe, is still the one of the 2 pilots up in that area. So this is QE2, very iconic cruise ship. And this was the cruise ship that started it all in the port of Bar Harbor. Bill and Gil, again, they were asked, can you help us establish a port? We want to open up Bar Harbor to cruise ships. I don't know where the impetus came from, but there was some talk and some question on the part of folks in the state to start bringing cruise ships in. And it just so happened that the first one happened to be one of the biggest cruise ships in the world at the time. So they did it. They went up there. They got their trips like they've done so often on fishing boats, and they got their license, and this was the result of it. And this is Bill again in the early days of Bar Harbor. I don't know what ship that would be or what the ship is in the background, but that is absolutely Bar Harbor. Well, I've whipped through a lot of photos here, a lot faster than I thought, and hopefully that'll leave time for some questions that people have. But I did want to finish my presentation with this particular slide. There's a saying that I think we all know about: behind every great man is a greater woman. The woman in the middle of this photo is Betty Abbott, Bill's wife of I don't know how many decades, but she was a great person, a great lady. I was very fond of Betty, and I'm glad to include her in this picture because I think, it's interesting to think about Bill and all the wonderful things he did, but he was really married to that job of piloting. And it took a special person to put up with someone who was so dedicated and so involved and so unavailable so many days and so often, because they were out, out on the river, out on the bay, out on the island, waiting for a ship, driving home in a snowstorm, wondering when your husband's going to come home. She was a really good sport about that. And in the same vein, Gilbert Hall's wife, Shirley Hall, was another real admirable person. She dispatched the pilots. She took the incoming phone calls. She kept the pilot board in their kitchen in Camden. She did the billing. So it really takes a special individual, and it's challenging even in these days, the hours that we keep and the schedule that we keep, but it was really unbelievable in their days. And I think anybody that knew Betty would say that she was a really big part of Bill's success. So that is the end of our slideshow.
All right, Dave, thank you so much. At this time, I invite, if there's anyone in the audience who has any questions for Dave, you can go ahead and type it into the Q&A box, which again can be found at the bottom of your screen by hovering your mouse over it. Ooh, There we go. And I also wanted to ask you real quick before we jump into audience questions. Did Bill and Betty end up having any kids that ended up carrying on the family business, so to speak, and go
No,
into
not they
piloting?
didn't carry on the family business, but their daughter Beth still lives up in Belfast, I believe.
Oh, really? Okay. She didn't get into anything related to the maritime arts at all?
No, not that I'm aware of. Not that I'm aware of.
Well, this was a very, very fascinating look inside, the life and career of Bill Abbott. And Dave, you did such a nice job helping us all kind of get a glimpse of his character, especially. And my goodness, what a person with true grit and a sense of humor, I guess.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about how you personally decided to take on this role and to get into piloting?
Well, after getting out of Maine Maritime in 1984, I shipped out deep sea for about 9 years, various trades around the world. And I early on, I realized that piloting job is a really interesting job, one that I'd like to have. And I originally started training in Alaska. I was actually licensed in federally licensed in 14 different places in Alaska before I came back to Maine and realized that there might be an opportunity here locally. And it was just very fortunate for me and somewhat dumb luck, but I ended up doing a sailboat race, the retired skipper's race with Sam Gamache of all people. He was quite elderly at that time, but I got put together with Captain Gamache on a boat. We sailed around the course and we got to talking about it. And he introduced me to Bill and Gil, and we started talking a little more and sort of got my foot in the door that way. And even though I had all that pilotage up in Alaska, I had recently bought a home in Maine. I really liked Maine and decided that if there was an opportunity to pursue something here, that I would. And I'm very fortunate. It's a small port. There have not been a lot of openings over the years. So I'm very fortunate to have gotten in, and I'm really blessed to have early in my career had Bill be a mentor, Gil Hall, all those people that I mentioned, the Bunkers on Matinicus, the Stanleys on Monhegan, John Worth and Duke Tomlin at the towboats. I just learned so much from all these individuals that I'm so grateful for.
Yeah, we certainly got a sense of that in the way you talked about them. It seems like an awesome experience to learn from such incredible people.
I was lucky.
So how long does it take to get to know something like the river? I mean, do most pilots stick with that one location for their entire lives just to perfect it, to get it down good? Or is it a kind of a job where you would periodically change locations?
Pilotage by its nature is very, very local. We have in Maine, we have 3 local pilot groups. We have Portland pilots, Penobscot Bay and River pilots, and then Eastport pilots. And we all stick to our particular regions because it's a question of knowing the waterway, repetition, doing it over and over, knowing the equipment, knowing the docks, knowing the currents. So really the benefit to the job that we bring is having done it so many hundreds or thousands of times over and over and over again. So generally speaking, you stick to one area. Having said that, a lot of the training, the duration of it can depend upon how busy the port is. You know, Searsport is busy enough to where we can get a pilot trained in a few years. The river, sadly, is down to where there's only one commercial dock left, and that's the Chinbro facility. There were, I think Bangor and Brewer alone had 8 or 9 commercial docks when I started piloting. Those are all gone except for one now. So we don't get traffic up the river as often. So it gets very difficult to train an incoming new pilot. You might get a pilot licensed, you might get a pilot license in the river in 4 to 5 years. It might take 8 or 9 to get enough training on the river.
Yeah, I can imagine so many variables to consider.
Yeah.
It's just incredibly impressive. We have a question that just came in that's in regards to the photo collection. So Beth wants to know, are there more Bill Abbott photos in addition to the exhibit at the Camden Library available to see at the Penobscot Marine Museum? And I don't know if you could speak to that at all, or if we should let Kevin type something into the chat box and I can.
There are, maybe Kevin can come on and say something, but I went through a whole host of photos the other day, and there are a lot more photos. There's a lot of great ones. There are a lot of much older. I kind of stuck with the vintage that Bill would have been working, but there were actually many older photos that show some of the steam tugs towing the schooners up and down from the days of Bangor being a lumber port. So yes, emphatically, yes, there are many, many more photos.
Kevin, did you want to unmute yourself and say anything about your experience with the collection?
Yes, I will say that there are many more photos, and a good chunk of them are online in our online database. And then there is another relatively good number of several hundred of his slides that are currently being digitized. Well, they're digitized and now they're being cataloged. So anyone can get in touch with me if they can't navigate our online system easily, but by all means, there's plenty more to see.
And they certainly did help to tell the story tonight, that's for sure. We had some comments come in that said some cool photos and a good backstory, nice informative photos to help us get a real feel of how things were, quote, back in the day. Speaking of back in the day, so has the technology improved significantly to make your job better? Is it something where their technology is improving in leaps and bounds?
I mean, compared to what Bill and Gil had, leaps and bounds is an understatement. I mean, it amazes me looking at those photos, especially those two photos of those large tankers up in Brewer. That is, it's mind-boggling. The largest vessel that I've had the experience of bringing up to Brewer is 400 feet long. And, you know, that was a barge. And I mean, it was a handful. It really fills up the river. So to be on a 577 foot ship, drawing, I don't know, 18, 19, 20 feet of draft. It's staggering to me what those gentlemen accomplished with the tools that they had. We have great equipment now. I mean, we have such great advances in technology now, and it's such an aid, but still, I probably wouldn't do some of the things that they did, even with the advances in navigation that we have. It's just, you know, it really boggles the mind what they were able to accomplish. But yes, we're very fortunate now. The added aids to navigation, we have the navigational instruments, communications especially. It's just all light years ahead of what Bill and Gil would have had to enjoy.
I wonder if the Penobscot Marine Museum has one of those big radio phones in their collection.
Yeah.
If not, you got to get one.
Yeah. No, I'm sure Bill was quite tickled when that came along. I mean, yeah. he always, whenever we showed him something new, because, you know, he kept in touch even after he stopped retiring or stopped piloting and was retired. He'd keep in touch with it. He was very, very invested in the pilots, not just, it's not like I'm done, I'm out of here. He knew all the young pilots coming up. He rode as much as he could. He'd go out and ride tugboats during a docking job. I mean, he really, really lived and breathed piloting. So he knew what was going on. And every time we'd come up with something new, oh, hey, isn't that slick? You know, he just got the greatest kick out of things.
Oh, I bet. We had a couple good questions just came in. So Ellen wants to know, how were pilots paid? She says, I'm working for the museum cataloging the exhibit and met you last Wednesday.
Oh, okay. So I don't know if it was any different back in the day when Bill and Gil did it, but now it's just like any group of individuals. You know, basically we split. We don't get paid, or I don't think Bill and Gil got paid for the jobs they did. I think everything was pooled, and then what was left after expenses were paid is what you earned. And really, that's the only equitable way to do it. I don't think you'd have a very positive working relationship with your partners if one guy took the big jobs that paid the big money and let the other guy do the small jobs, right? That didn't pay as much. I mean, they're all, you still got to go out to the islands. You still have to wait for the ship. You still have to put the time in. So they're all, you know, fairly long in nature. And the only fair way to handle it is just split it across the board equitably. And I'm pretty sure that's the way Bill and Gil ran it back in the day.
Thank you. That's an interesting perspective on that. We had one more question come in. It says, please talk about the authority and responsibilities of the pilot, officer of the deck, and captain when a pilot is aboard a ship.
So I alluded to that a little bit in my opening remarks. The captain of a vessel is always the captain. The captain is always overall responsible for his vessel. Nothing overrides the authority of a captain. Having said that, the job of a state pilot, we're not just suggesting things to the captain. We are directing the navigation of the vessel in the state waters. We're giving the engine orders. We're giving the helm orders. We're giving the courses. We're talking to the tugboats. When the tugboats come out to the ship, we're giving the docking instructions. It's a working collaboration with the captains. A lot of times you'll hear people talk about, you know, who's in charge or whose authority is in charge or who gets the final say. I mean, I've been doing this for 30 years now, and fortunately, I've never had an instance where I've given an order and the captain said, no, I don't like that. We're not doing that. You know, in the vast majority of instances, foreign captains are coming here, many of them for the first time ever. They appreciate what the local pilot brings.
You know what you're doing.
Well, and I have always found at the end of the day, the job is get the ship safely from sea to the dock. Most captains have no problem working with a pilot that way. You know, sometimes it's a little bit much. You know, poor guy's been up all night and he's got paperwork to do, and pilot's aboard and he's like, okay, pilot, here's the third mate. I've got to get the papers ready for customs. You know, it's like, they trust you implicitly. You're bringing the ship up, pilot. I've got other things to do. So in terms of responsibility, captain's always going to be overall responsible for anything that happens on his ship, but we are compulsory pilots. So we are compelled by law to be aboard these ships. So we bear onus as well, and we have responsibility as well.
And the respect that goes along with it, that's for sure. All right, well, those are all the questions that came in tonight. Kevin, before we wrap up, was there anything else you wanted to say or plug or mention?
No, just that we'd love you to come visit us this summer season and see what we have to offer and stay in touch. And we'll start thinking about our next Maritime Month next year.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Captain Dave. That was really great.
Yes, thank you so much. We are very, very happy to have once again collaborated with the Penobscot Marine Museum. Please visit them online at penobscotmarinemuseum.org, and please visit the Camden Public Library online and in person when you can. But we're at librarycamden.org. We have one more Maritime Month program coming up on this Thursday at 6 o'clock, and it's a collaboration with another museum, the Maine Maritime Museum. And we're going to be talking about Maine's economic connections to slavery, and a lot of it has to do with shipbuilding. So I hope that you will join us for that program this Thursday. Again, please visit the Camden Public Library's website for more information and to sign up for your Zoom link. Dave and Kevin, this has been very, very interesting. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this program tonight.
Thanks for the opportunity.
And thank you all for joining us. Take care and have a wonderful rest of your night. Bye-bye.